The bullet ricocheted off the canyon wall 6 inches from Teresa Sullivan's head, sending rock fragments spraying across her cheek as she pressed herself against the sun-baked stone, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst right through her ribs. "Come on out, Miss Sullivan," the voice echoed through the narrow canyon, bouncing off the red sandstone walls that trapped her like the bars of a prison. "We just want to talk about your daddy's mining claim, real civilized-like." Teresa's fingers tightened around the small derringer in her hand, knowing full well that 2 shots wouldn't be nearly enough against the 4 men who had chased her into this godforsaken canyon outside Riverton, Wyoming. The summer of 1876 had been brutal already, the heat making everything shimmer like a mirage, and now it seemed her luck had finally run out. She had been riding back from checking on her father's claim when they had appeared, spreading out to cut off her escape routes until she had no choice but to spur her mare into this narrow passage between the rocky cliffs. Her father had warned her. Samuel Sullivan had told her time and again that the Dekker brothers were bad news, that they had been trying to muscle in on his silver claim for months. But Teresa had inherited her daddy's stubborn streak. She had thought she could handle herself, thought she was careful enough. Now her mare was 50 yards back down the canyon with a bullet in her leg, whimpering pitifully, and Teresa was pinned down with nowhere to go. "Your daddy should have sold when he had the chance," another voice called out, closer this time. Jake Dekker, the eldest of the 4 brothers, was known for his mean streak. "Now things are going to get messy, starting with you." Teresa swallowed hard, tasting dust and fear. The canyon walls rose 60 feet on either side of her, impossible to climb with the smooth sandstone faces offering no handholds. Behind her, the canyon ended in a sheer wall where centuries of flash floods had carved out a natural amphitheater. She was trapped, pure and simple, with 4 armed men closing in and only her stubbornness and 2 bullets between her and whatever they had planned. She was 22 years old, had lived in Wyoming her whole life, and she had always figured she would die with her boots on like most folks out here. But she had hoped for a few more years, maybe time enough to see her father strike it rich, maybe time enough to fall in love the way her mother had described before the fever took her when Teresa was just 12. Instead, she was going to die in this canyon, and her father would spend the rest of his days blaming himself. The sound of boots on stone made her press harder against the wall. They were getting closer, probably splitting up to come at her from different angles. Her palms were slick with sweat, making the derringer's grip feel loose and uncertain. "Last chance, darling," Jake Dekker's voice rang out. "Come out peaceful and maybe we will let you walk away. Make us work for it and I promise you will regret it." Teresa's jaw clenched. She knew what men like the Dekkers did to women out here in the wilderness where law was scarce and justice even scarcer. She would use both bullets and then she would go down fighting with whatever she could find, even if it meant throwing rocks until they put her down. She closed her eyes for just a moment, said a quick prayer her mother had taught her, and prepared to step out from cover. That was when she heard it. A sound like thunder rolling down from the mountains, except the sky was clear and blue as a robin's egg. The Dekkers heard it too because their footsteps stopped and she heard confused muttering from somewhere beyond the bend in the canyon. "What the hell is that?" one of them said. Then came a roar that made Teresa's blood run cold and hot all at once. It was not an animal sound exactly, though it had that primal edge to it. It was the sound of a man pushed beyond words, beyond reason, into pure righteous fury. The gunshot that followed was not the sharp crack of a pistol but the deep boom of a heavy rifle, the kind that could drop a grizzly bear at 200 yards. Someone screamed, and not a woman's scream but a man's, high-pitched and filled with terror and pain. "Who the hell are you?" Jake Dekker's voice had lost its cocky edge, replaced with something that sounded almost like fear. The answer came not in words but in the sound of impact, flesh and bone meeting with devastating force. More gunshots followed, wild and panicked, the kind of shooting men did when they were scared out of their minds. Teresa dared to peek around the edge of her cover, looking back toward where the Dekkers had been approaching from. What she saw made her question whether the heat had finally gotten to her brain. A man emerged from the pine trees that clung to the upper edges of the canyon, moving down the steep slope with the sure-footed confidence of a mountain lion. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair was dark and long, hanging past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin trousers and a leather vest over a bare chest that rippled with muscle, his skin sun-bronzed and marked with old scars that spoke of a hard life in hard country. But it was the way he moved that truly captured her attention. Despite his size, he flowed like water, like violence given human form. In his hands was a Sharps rifle that he wielded like it weighed nothing, and on his hip she could see the glint of a large knife in a beaded sheath. One of the Dekker brothers, the youngest one named Pete, raised his revolver with shaking hands and fired. The bullet went wide by a foot. The mountain man did not even flinch. He closed the distance in 3 powerful strides, and his fist connected with Pete's jaw with a sound like a hammer hitting meat. Pete dropped like a puppet with cut strings. "Get him!" Jake Dekker shouted, and the remaining 2 brothers opened fire together. The mountain man moved. He rolled behind a boulder, came up with his rifle already aimed, and fired. The boom echoed through the canyon, and Frank Dekker spun around, clutching his shoulder, his gun falling from nerveless fingers. Before Jake could adjust his aim, the mountain man was moving again, covering ground with terrifying speed. Jake got off one more shot before the mountain man reached him. This time the bullet hit, tearing through the meat of the stranger's left arm, but it might as well have been a bee sting for all the reaction it got. The mountain man's hand shot out, gripping Jake by the throat, lifting him clear off the ground with one arm. Jake's eyes bulged, his face turning purple as his feet kicked uselessly in the air. "The woman," the mountain man said, and his voice was like gravel rolling down a mountainside, rough and deep and absolutely certain. "You were going to hurt her." It was not a question. Jake tried to speak, managed only a strangled wheeze. "That was a mistake," the mountain man continued, and then he threw Jake Dekker like he was nothing more than a sack of flour. Jake hit the canyon wall hard enough to crack stone, then crumpled to the ground and did not move. The last brother standing, Marcus Dekker, was backing away with his hands raised, his gun already discarded on the ground. "I did not touch her," Marcus said quickly, his voice high with panic. "I swear I did not touch her. It was Jake's idea, all Jake's idea." The mountain man turned to look at him, and even from where Teresa stood, she could feel the weight of that gaze. "Run," the mountain man said simply. Marcus ran. He scrambled back down the canyon like the devil himself was on his heels, not even pausing to check on his brothers. The sound of his panicked flight echoed for a long moment, then faded, leaving only the soft moan of the wounded Frank Dekker and the labored breathing of unconscious Pete. Teresa realized she was still holding her derringer, still pressed against the wall, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and shock. The mountain man turned toward her, and for the first time she got a clear look at his face. He had eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue and piercing. His features were hard, carved by weather and time and violence into something fierce and uncompromising. The beard could not hide the strong line of his jaw, and his nose had been broken at least once, maybe twice. He looked like something out of a legend, like the heroes in the dime novels she sometimes read in secret, except real and solid and currently bleeding from the gunshot wound in his arm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and despite the roughness of his voice there was genuine concern in it. Teresa's mouth opened, but no words came out. She tried again. No, I am not hurt." He nodded once, then turned his attention to his wounded arm. Blood was running down to his elbow, dripping onto the dusty ground, but he barely seemed to notice. He pulled a knife from his belt, cut a strip of leather from his vest, and began wrapping it around the wound with practiced efficiency. "Your horse," he said, not looking at her. "She is shot, leg wound, clean through, missed the bone. She will live if we treat her soon." Teresa finally managed to get her legs working and pushed away from the wall. Her knees felt like water, but she forced herself to walk toward him. Up close, he was even more imposing. She was not a small woman at 5'7", but she had to crane her neck to look up at his face. "Who are you?" she asked. He finished tying off the bandage on his arm, tested the tightness, then finally met her eyes. "Seth Garrett. I have a cabin up in the mountains. Heard the shooting." "You came all the way down here because you heard gunshots?" Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched his eyes. "These men," he gestured to the scattered Dekkers, "they have been making trouble. Heard about them in town last week when I came in for supplies. Figured if there was shooting in this canyon, it was probably them." Teresa looked at the carnage around them. Pete was starting to stir, groaning, and Frank was still clutching his wounded shoulder, his face pale with shock and pain. Jake was breathing but not moving, slumped against the canyon wall where he had landed. "You almost killed them," Teresa said, not entirely sure how she felt about that. "Almost," Seth agreed. "But I did not. They will live to face justice if there is any to be had in Riverton." "There is not much," Teresa admitted. "The sheriff is paid off by the mining companies. The Dekkers have been terrorizing small claim holders for months, trying to force them to sell." Seth looked at her more carefully, and she felt suddenly self-conscious. She knew she looked a mess, covered in dust and sweat, her dark hair falling out of its braid, her simple riding dress torn at the hem. She was not a beauty like some of the saloon girls in town, though she had been told she had nice eyes, dark brown like her mother's. "You are Sullivan's daughter," Seth said. It was not a question. "You know my father?" "Met him once. Good man, honest." "These men were after his claim?" Teresa nodded. "They have been pressuring him to sell for 3 months now. Today they found me out by the claim, started chasing me, herding me like cattle until I had no choice but to come into this canyon. They were going to—" She trailed off, not wanting to put words to what they had been planning. Seth's jaw tightened, the muscles jumping beneath his beard. They made a mistake, he said again, and there was something final in his tone, like a tombstone inscription. I need to check on my horse, Teresa said, desperate to think about something other than what had almost happened. Her name is Rosie. She is a good mare. I will help, Seth said simply, and started walking back down the canyon. Teresa followed, acutely aware of the way he moved, all controlled power and absolute confidence. He favored his wounded arm slightly but otherwise showed no sign of pain or weakness. They found Rosie where Teresa had left her, the mare whimpering and wild-eyed with pain and fear. Easy, girl, Teresa murmured, approaching slowly with her hands out. Easy now, you are going to be fine. Seth knelt beside the horse, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he examined the wound. Went through the muscle clean, no major blood vessels. She is lucky.
Can you help her?
Teresa asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. Rosie had been her mother's horse before the fever, one of the last connections Teresa had to her. Yes, Seth said with certainty, but not here. We need to get her to my cabin. I have medical supplies there, herbs and poultices that will prevent infection. It is about 2 miles up into the mountains. 2 miles? She cannot walk that far on this leg. Seth stood thinking. There is a narrow trail not far from here that I use to bring my horse down. It is not easy, but she can manage it if we are slow and careful. I will walk beside her, keep her calm. Teresa looked at this stranger who had appeared like something out of a fever dream, who had single-handedly defeated 4 armed men, who was now offering to help her wounded horse with the same intensity he had brought to the fight. Why are you helping me? She asked. You do not know me. Seth met her eyes, and for a moment, the hardness in his face softened into something almost vulnerable. Because you needed help, he said simply, and because I am tired of standing by while men like the Dekkers hurt people who cannot defend themselves. It was not a romantic answer or a flowery one, but it was honest, and Teresa found herself trusting this strange mountain man in a way that probably was not entirely wise. Okay, she said, show me this trail. It took them nearly 2 hours to get Rosie up to Seth's cabin, and by the time they arrived, Teresa's legs were shaking with exhaustion and her lungs burned from the altitude. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a small stream running nearby. It was well built, solid and weatherproof, larger than she had expected, with a covered porch and real glass windows. You built this? She asked as Seth helped her ease Rosie into a small stable attached to the side of the cabin. Most of it, he said. Bought the windows in town. Everything else came from the mountain. Inside the stable, Seth worked with calm efficiency. He cleaned the wound, applied a poultice that smelled of pine and something bitter, and wrapped it carefully with clean bandages. Throughout the process, he kept up a low, soothing murmur that seemed to calm the mare more effectively than any restraints could have. Teresa watched his hands as he worked, noting the scars that marked his knuckles, the calluses that spoke of hard labor, and the surprising gentleness with which he handled Rosie. These were hands that could break bones and save lives in equal measure, and she found herself wondering about the man they belonged to. When he finally stepped back from the horse, satisfaction clear on his face, Teresa realized the sun was starting to sink toward the western mountains. I need to get back to town, she said reluctantly. My father will be worried sick. It will be dark in 2 hours, Seth said, washing his hands in a bucket of water. The trail down is treacherous at night, easy to lose your footing. You should wait until morning. Teresa's first instinct was to protest, to insist she could manage, but the truth was her body was already exhausted, and the thought of that difficult trail in the dark made her stomach clench with anxiety. I do not want to impose. You are not, Seth said simply. I will make dinner. You can sleep in the cabin. I will take the stable. I cannot let you sleep in the stable when I am the one imposing on your hospitality. Seth turned to look at her, and there was something almost amused in his expression. Miss Sullivan, I have slept in trees, caves, and snowbanks. My stable is more comfortable than most hotels. You will take the cabin. The way he said it left no room for argument, and Teresa found herself nodding in agreement. She followed him to the cabin, stepping through the door into a single large room that was surprisingly neat and well organized. A fireplace dominated one wall, with a comfortable-looking chair positioned nearby. A sturdy table and 2 chairs sat near the window. Against the far wall was a bed covered with furs and blankets and shelves lined with books, jars of preserved food and various tools and supplies. You read? Teresa asked, surprised by the number of books. Long winters, Seth said, moving to the fireplace to start building a fire. Not much else to do when the snow is 10 feet deep. Teresa moved closer to the shelves, reading the spines. Shakespeare, Dickens, Thoreau, and several books on natural history and medicine. You are not what I expected, she said without thinking, then immediately regretted it. But Seth just made that almost sound that might have been a laugh. What did you expect? I do not know. Someone more rough, I suppose. Less educated. I am plenty rough, Seth said, striking a match to light the kindling. But my mother was a teacher before she married my father. She made sure I could read before I could ride. Said it was important to understand that there was a world beyond the mountains. Was, Teresa asked gently. She died when I was 15. Influenza. My father followed her 6 months later. Broken heart, the doctor said, though I think it was more that he just gave up. Seth's voice was matter of fact, but Teresa could hear the old pain underneath. That was 12 years ago. So he was 27, only 5 years older than her. Somehow he seemed older, like he had lived several lifetimes already. I am sorry, Teresa said, meaning it. I lost my mother when I was 12. Fever. I know how it feels. Seth looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. They were both survivors, both shaped by loss and hardship into something stronger than they might have been otherwise. I will make us something to eat, Seth said finally, breaking the moment. There is a basin and fresh water on the table if you want to wash up. Teresa gratefully cleaned the dust and grime from her face and hands, watching from the corner of her eye as Seth moved around his kitchen area with practiced ease. He put coffee on to boil, then began preparing what looked like venison steaks and wild vegetables. His movements were economical and efficient, no wasted motion, the same way he had moved during the fight. How long have you lived up here? Teresa asked, settling into one of the chairs. 5 years. After my father died, I tried living in civilization for a while. Worked as a scout for the army, did some hunting for the railroad crews. But I did not fit anymore. Too many people, too much noise, too many rules that did not make sense. He paused, flipping the steaks in the pan. Up here, things are simple. You work, you survive, you do not hurt anyone who does not deserve it. That is enough. Do not you get lonely? Seth was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, he admitted. But lonely is better than being surrounded by people and feeling empty. Teresa understood that more than she cared to admit. Life in Riverton was lonely in its own way, full of people who saw her as Samuel Sullivan's daughter, not as Teresa in her own right. The men who showed interest were either fortune hunters eyeing her father's claim or rough miners looking for a woman to cook and clean for them. None of them saw her, really saw her. What about you? Seth asked, bringing 2 plates to the table. Why are you not married? Pretty woman like you, I would think you would have your pick of suitors. Teresa felt her cheeks heat at the casual compliment. The men in Riverton are not exactly what I am looking for, she said diplomatically. Most of them are more interested in my father's silver than in me. Then they are fools, Seth said simply, sitting down across from her. They ate in comfortable silence, and Teresa was surprised by how good the food was. The venison was perfectly cooked, seasoned with wild herbs, and the vegetables had a smoky flavor from the fire. She had not realized how hungry she was until she started eating, and she cleaned her plate with almost embarrassing speed. There is more if you want it, Seth offered, and Teresa accepted gratefully. As they ate their second helping, Teresa found herself studying him more carefully. In the firelight, his features seemed less harsh, the planes and angles of his face softened by the warm glow. His eyes, which had seemed so cold and fierce during the fight, held a warmth now as he watched her eat. There was something almost protective in his gaze, like she was precious cargo he had been tasked with guarding. Tell me about your father's claim, Seth said eventually. Is it really as rich as people say? Teresa nodded. He struck a good vein about 4 months ago. Not enough to make us wealthy, but enough to provide a comfortable life if we can work it properly. The problem is the big mining companies want to buy up all the small claims in the area, consolidate them into one big operation. They have been using men like the Dekkers to pressure people into selling. Why do not you sell? Take the money and start somewhere fresh. Because my father spent 20 years searching for that vein. He sacrificed everything for it, including time with me and my mother. If we sell now, it will be like admitting all that sacrifice was for nothing. Teresa looked down at her plate. Besides, it is the principle of the thing. We should not have to run because bad men want to steal what is rightfully ours. Seth nodded slowly. Principle is important. But so is staying alive. Is that why you live up here? To stay alive? Partly, Seth admitted. Also because I killed a man who needed killing and his friends did not see it that way. Easier to disappear into the mountains than fight a war I could not win. Teresa's eyes widened. You are wanted by the law was, Seth corrected. This was 5 years ago down in Colorado. I was working as a scout and one of the soldiers decided he wanted to have his way with a Cheyenne girl. I stopped him, permanently. The army was not pleased. So I left before they could hang me for it. He said it so calmly, like he was describing the weather, but Teresa could see the steel underneath. This was a man who had clear lines about right and wrong, and once you crossed those lines, he became something terrible and final. Did you love her? Teresa asked. The Cheyenne girl? Seth looked surprised by the question. No, I barely knew her, but she was 14 years old and terrified, and he was twice her size and armed. What he was trying to do was wrong. That was enough. Teresa found herself liking this hard, dangerous man more with every word he spoke. He had saved her today for the same reason, not because he expected reward or recognition but because what the Dekkers were doing was wrong, and he had the power to stop it. There was something pure about that kind of morality, uncomplicated by politics or social niceties. "The Dekkers will come back," Teresa said quietly. "Jake will not let this go. He will bring more men, maybe hire professional guns." "Let him," Seth said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "If he wants to die that badly, I will accommodate him. You cannot fight an army by yourself. I have before." Seth met her eyes across the table. "But this is not your problem to worry about tonight. Tonight you are safe, your horse is healing, and the Dekkers are licking their wounds. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." The coffee was ready, and Seth poured them each a cup. It was strong and bitter, the way Teresa liked it, and it helped chase away the last of the day's fear and exhaustion. They talked more as they drank, easier conversation now, about life in the mountains and life in town, about books they had read and places they hoped to see someday. Teresa learned that Seth had been as far east as St. Louis once, had seen the mighty Mississippi River and found it disappointing compared to the wild mountain streams he knew. She told him about her dreams of someday visiting San Francisco, seeing the ocean, maybe even taking a ship to somewhere exotic and far away. "Why do not you?" Seth asked. "You are young, unattached, nothing holding you here except your father's claim." "Except," Teresa repeated. "That is a big except. My father needs me. And beyond that, I suppose I am afraid. The world is so big and I am just one person. What if I leave and find out I do not belong there either?" "Then you come back," Seth said simply. "That is the thing about being alive, Miss Sullivan. You get to make mistakes and change your mind. Nothing is final until you are dead. Please call me Teresa. I think you have earned the right after saving my life." "Teresa," Seth said, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "That is a good name, pretty. My mother chose it. She said it meant harvester, someone who gathers in the good things. I always thought it was a strange name for a mountain girl, but she insisted." "It fits you," Seth said, and there was something in his eyes now, something warm and appreciative that made Teresa's breath catch. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and Teresa realized that despite knowing this man for less than a day, she felt more comfortable with him than she had with anyone in years. Maybe it was the shared danger, the intimacy of being saved and saving in return. Or maybe it was something deeper, some recognition that passed between kindred spirits. "I should let you rest," Seth said finally, standing and collecting their plates. "You have had a hard day." Teresa wanted to protest, wanted to keep talking into the night, but her body was already betraying her with a yawn. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you. You do not owe me anything." Seth said firmly, "Get some sleep. I will check on your horse one more time, then bed down in the stable. If you need anything, just call out. I am a light sleeper." He left before she could respond, closing the door gently behind him. Teresa stood alone in the cabin, feeling strangely bereft now that he was gone. She prepared for bed, stripping down to her chemise and washing again with the basin water. The bed was more comfortable than it looked, the furs soft and warm, and despite everything that had happened, she felt safe here in a way she had not felt safe in a long time. Outside, she could hear Seth moving around, his low voice talking to Rosie, and the sound was oddly comforting. She drifted off to sleep, thinking about winter blue eyes and gentle hands, about the way he had moved through violence like an avenging angel, about the loneliness in his voice when he talked about his mountain solitude. She dreamed of a man made of stone and silence who learned to speak again because she taught him the words. Teresa woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, sunlight streaming through the windows in golden shafts. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing her surroundings, and then memory flooded back. The canyon, the Dekkers, Seth appearing like something out of legend. She dressed quickly in yesterday's dusty clothes, wishing she had something clean to wear, and stepped outside to find Seth cooking over a fire pit near the cabin. He had changed his bandage, she noticed, and the wound on his arm looked clean and already starting to heal. He moved with no visible stiffness or pain, which seemed impossible given that he had been shot less than 24 hours ago. "Good morning," she said, and he turned to look at her with something that might have been pleasure in his expression. "Morning. Hungry?" "Starving," she admitted, and he handed her a plate piled with bacon, fried eggs, and thick slices of bread toasted over the fire. They ate watching the sun climb higher over the mountains, turning the peaks gold and crimson. The air was cool and clean, scented with pine and wildflowers, and Teresa thought she had never seen a more beautiful morning. Birds sang in the trees, and somewhere in the distance an elk bugled, the sound echoing across the valleys. "I checked on Rosie this morning," Seth said between bites. "The swelling is down, and she is putting some weight on the leg. A few more days of rest, and she should be able to make the trip back to town." "A few more days?" Teresa repeated, her stomach doing a complicated flip that was not entirely unpleasant. "Unless you want to leave her here and walk down yourself." The trail is rough, but you could make it to town in about 4 hours if you pushed hard. Teresa thought about her father, who would be frantic with worry by now. But she also thought about Rosie, who had been her mother's horse and deserved the best care possible. And if she was being honest with herself, she thought about spending a few more days here in this mountain paradise with this fascinating, complicated man. I will stay, she said, but I need to get word to my father. He will think the Dekkers killed me and dumped my body somewhere. Seth nodded. I will ride down to town this afternoon. Let him know you are safe. Is there anything else you need me to tell him? Tell him about the Dekkers, about what they tried to do. Maybe he will finally agree to hire some guards for the claim. I will tell him, Seth promised. And I will stop by the sheriff's office too. Let them know what happened. Not that I expect them to do anything useful, but it should be on record. After breakfast, Seth showed Teresa around his property. Beyond the cabin and stable, he had a small garden where he grew vegetables, a smokehouse for preserving meat, and a root cellar dug into the hillside. Everything was well maintained and organized, evidence of a man who took pride in self-sufficiency. You could survive up here for years without going to town, Teresa observed. I have, Seth said. Sometimes I go 6 months between visits to civilization. Longer in winter when the passes are snowed in. That sounds incredibly lonely. Seth was quiet for a moment, looking out at the mountains that surrounded them like protective walls. It is, he admitted. But after my father died, I did not know how to be around people anymore. Everything felt wrong, like I was wearing clothes that did not fit. Up here, I could just be myself. No expectations, no judgments, no having to pretend that I was not breaking inside. Teresa moved closer to him, drawn by the raw honesty in his words. And now, are you still breaking inside? He looked down at her, and she was struck again by how tall he was, how solid and real. No, he said softly, I healed. Took a long time, but I healed. Problem is, I do not know if I remember how to be around people anymore. Civilization feels even more foreign now than it did before. You seem to be doing fine with me, Teresa said, and was rewarded with one of his rare, almost smiles. You are different, he said. You do not expect me to be something I am not. You just accept what is. They stood there in the mountain sunshine, close enough that Teresa could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the individual whiskers in his thick beard, could count the small scars that marked his hands and forearms. He smelled of pine smoke and leather and something uniquely him, and she found herself wanting to move even closer, to see if he would wrap those massive arms around her and make her feel as safe as she had felt last night in his cabin. But Seth stepped back, breaking the moment. I should get ready to ride to town, he said, his voice carefully neutral. You will be all right here by yourself? Teresa nodded, pushing down her disappointment. I grew up in Wyoming. I know how to handle myself. There is a rifle by the door, Seth said, already loaded. If anyone comes up that trail who is not me, shoot first and ask questions later. That seems extreme. Better extreme than dead, Seth said flatly. The Dekkers know I brought you up here. If they have any sense, they will leave well enough alone. But sense is not something they are known for. He saddled his horse, a massive bay gelding that stood nearly 17 hands high and looked strong enough to carry Seth's considerable bulk without complaint. Teresa watched him check his weapons, sliding the big Sharps rifle into its saddle scabbard and checking the loads on his revolver. He moved with the careful attention of a man who understood that staying alive required constant vigilance. I will be back before dark, he promised, swinging up into the saddle with easy grace despite his size. Stay close to the cabin. If you hear anything strange, anything at all, get inside and bar the door. You are starting to scare me, Teresa said, trying to make it sound like a joke. Good, Seth said seriously. Scared keeps you careful. Careful keeps you breathing. He rode off down the trail, and Teresa watched until he disappeared around a bend, feeling suddenly very alone. She went back into the cabin and retrieved the rifle, a heavy Winchester that had clearly seen hard use but was immaculately maintained. She checked the load like her father had taught her, then set it within easy reach of the door. The morning stretched into afternoon, and Teresa occupied herself with small tasks. She washed her dress and underclothes in the stream, hanging them on tree branches to dry in the sun. She checked on Rosie, who seemed to be improving rapidly under Seth's care. She explored the edges of the clearing, never going far enough that she could not see the cabin, marveling at the beauty of this hidden valley. She found herself thinking about Seth constantly, replaying their conversations, remembering the way he had fought to protect her, the gentleness in his hands when he treated her horse, the loneliness in his voice when he talked about his years of solitude. She wondered what it would be like to kiss a man with a beard like that, whether it would be rough or soft, whether his lips would be gentle or demanding. Stop it, she told herself firmly. You have known him for one day. You are acting like a foolish girl in a dime novel. But her heart did not seem to care about logic. Her heart was already halfway to falling for this mountain man who had appeared out of nowhere and saved her life, who read Shakespeare and cooked venison and lived alone because the world had hurt him too deeply to bear. She was sitting on the porch steps, lost in thought, when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses moving fast. Teresa's heart leaped into her throat and she grabbed the Winchester, her palms suddenly slick with sweat, but then Seth's voice called out, "It is just me, Teresa, and I brought your father." Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt lightheaded. She set the rifle aside and stood just as Seth and her father emerged from the tree line. Samuel Sullivan looked like he had aged 10 years overnight, his face haggard with worry and lack of sleep. But when he saw Teresa standing there safe and whole, he practically fell off his horse in his hurry to get to her. "Teresa!" He caught her in a fierce hug and she could feel him trembling. "I thought I had lost you. When Rosie did not come home, when night fell and you still were not back, I thought the worst." "I am sorry, Papa," Teresa said, hugging him back just as tightly. "The Dekkers chased me into the canyon. They shot Rosie. If Seth had not come when he did." She trailed off, not wanting to put words to what might have happened. Samuel pulled back, gripping her shoulders and looking her over carefully. "Did they hurt you? Did any of them touch you?" "No, Papa. Seth got there before they could do anything. She glanced at Seth, who was tending to the horses with studied nonchalance. "He took care of all 4 of them, sent them running like whipped dogs." Samuel turned to look at Seth with new appreciation. "Seth told me what happened, told me how he found you in that canyon and dealt with the Dekkers. I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Garrett. If there is anything I can do to repay you, anything at all, you just name it." Seth shook his head. "No payment needed. I did what any decent man would do." "Decent men are in short supply these days," Samuel said grimly. "And from what Seth tells me, he did considerably more than most men could have managed. 4 armed men against 1, and he came away with just a scratch." "It was more than a scratch," Teresa interjected. "He was shot." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "You were shot?" Seth made a dismissive gesture. "Barely grazed me. I have had worse from thorns." Teresa noticed he was moving his arm normally now, no sign of stiffness or pain, which seemed impossible for a wound less than 2 days old. The man healed like some kind of wild animal, fast and complete. "I brought supplies," Samuel said, gesturing to his saddlebags. "Clean clothes for Teresa, some food as thanks for your hospitality and information." The sheriff was as useless as expected, said it was the Dekkers' word against yours, and since none of them ended up dead, he saw no reason to pursue charges. "But I did some asking around, and it turns out Jake Dekker and his brothers left town on the morning stage, heading east. Word is they said they had business in Cheyenne, but folks are saying they looked spooked, like they saw a ghost." Seth nodded, unsurprised. "They will not come back. Not after yesterday." "I hope you are right," Samuel said. "But I hired 2 men to watch the claim just in case. Friends of mine, veterans of the war, good with guns and trustworthy. They will stay on as long as I need them." "That is wise," Seth said. "The Dekkers were not working alone. Someone bigger is behind them, someone who wants your claim badly enough to use violence. Those people do not give up just because their enforcers got scared off." Samuel's face darkened. "I know. That is why I am thinking seriously about selling. Not to the mining companies, but maybe to one of the other independent miners. Someone who can afford to defend it properly. I thought I could hold out, but after yesterday..." He looked at Teresa with so much anguish in his eyes that she had to look away. "I cannot risk losing you. You are all I have left of your mother." Teresa wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to keep fighting, but the words died in her throat, because he was right. The claim was not worth dying over, was not worth her father spending the rest of his life consumed by guilt because he had been too stubborn to back down. "That is your choice to make," Seth said quietly. "But for what it is worth, running does not always solve the problem. Sometimes the bad men just follow you to the next place." "Are you suggesting we stay and fight?" Samuel asked. "I am suggesting you think carefully about what you are willing to sacrifice," Seth said. "Your claim, your pride, or your peace of mind. Only you can decide which matters most." They went inside, and Teresa changed gratefully into the clean dress her father had brought. It was her second best, a dark blue calico with white flowers, and she felt more human once she was wearing clean clothes. When she emerged, her father and Seth were deep in conversation about mining techniques and ore quality, and she was struck by how comfortable they seemed with each other. 2 men who understood hard work and the value of honesty. She made coffee while they talked, moving around Seth's cabin like she belonged there, and noticed him watching her with those winter blue eyes, something warm and wondering in his expression. When their eyes met, he did not look away, and neither did she, and the moment stretched between them like a promise. "Teresa tells me Rosie is healing well," Samuel said, breaking the spell. "Yes," Seth said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Another few days and she should be able to travel. The wound is clean, no infection. She is a tough mare, like mother, like horse." Samuel said with a slight smile, "My wife's mare never knew when to quit either, stubborn as a mountain." They spent the afternoon in easy companionship, and Teresa watched her father slowly relax as he realized she was truly safe. He told stories about her mother, about the early days when he and Catherine had first come to Wyoming full of dreams and determination. Seth listened with genuine interest, asking questions, and Teresa could see her father warming to this quiet mountain man who had saved his daughter. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Samuel reluctantly announced he needed to head back to town. "I do not like leaving you here," he said to Teresa, "but Seth assures me you are safer in this valley than anywhere in Riverton right now." "I will watch over her," Seth promised, and there was something almost ceremonial in the way he said it, like he was taking a vow. Samuel studied Seth for a long moment and then nodded slowly. "I believe you will. Teresa, I will come back in 3 days to fetch you and Rosie. That should be enough time for her leg to heal sufficiently." 3 more days, Teresa thought, and was surprised by how much the thought pleased her. 3 more days in this mountain paradise with a man who made her heart race and her thoughts scatter. After her father left, the cabin felt suddenly very intimate with just the two of them. Seth busied himself starting a fire and preparing dinner while Teresa set the table, and they moved around each other with an awkward awareness that had not been there before. "Your father is a good man," Seth said as they ate. "He is," Teresa agreed. "He has worked so hard for that claim. It will break his heart to sell it. Better a broken heart than a dead daughter." Teresa pushed her food around on her plate. "I know you are right, but it feels like letting the bad people win." "Sometimes survival is winning," Seth said. "There is no shame in recognizing when you are outmatched. Is that what you did when you left Colorado?" Seth was quiet for a moment. "No," he admitted. "I ran because I was not ready to die for something that did not matter. The army wanted to make an example of me to keep the troops in line, and I was not interested in being a martyr, but if I had to do it again, I would. That soldier deserved what he got, and the girl deserved to be protected. That mattered. And my father's claim, does that matter? To him, yes, but you matter more, and he knows that, which is why he is considering selling." Teresa met his eyes across the table. "What would you do if you were in his position?" Seth thought about it carefully. "I would hire good men I trusted, and I would fortify the claim. Make it clear that anyone who came looking for trouble would find more than they bargained for." "But," he held up a hand before she could respond, "I am not your father. I have no family left to protect, no one I care about who could be used against me. That changes things." The words "no one I care about" seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with implication. Did that mean he was starting to care about her, or was she reading too much into a simple statement? They cleaned up after dinner in companionable silence, and then Teresa went outside to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Seth joined her on the porch, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I have been alone up here for 5 years, Seth said quietly, his eyes on the distant peaks. "I thought I was content with that, thought I had everything I needed." Teresa's breath caught. "And now?" "Now I am not so sure," he admitted, and turned to look at her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "You have been here less than 2 days, Teresa, and already this cabin feels different. Less like a hiding place and more like a home, Seth," Teresa breathed. Not sure what she was asking for, but knowing she wanted something, wanted him. He raised his hand slowly, telegraphing the movement like he was approaching a skittish animal, and gently cupped her cheek. His palm was rough with calluses but infinitely gentle, and Teresa leaned into the touch without thinking. "I do not know how to do this," Seth said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been alone for so long I have forgotten how to be with someone. But I know that when I saw you in that canyon, when I realized what those men were planning to do to you, something inside me woke up. Something I thought was dead. What was it?" Teresa whispered, already knowing the answer but needing to hear him say it. "The part of me that still knows how to care," Seth said simply. "The part that wants to protect and cherish and keep safe. I thought I had lost that when my parents died, when I saw too much cruelty and violence and decided it was easier to feel nothing. But you brought it back, Teresa Sullivan. In less than 2 days you made me remember what it feels like to want something more than just survival." Teresa turned her face into his palm, pressing a kiss to the rough skin there. Seth inhaled sharply, his eyes darkening with something that looked like wonder and desire mixed together. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. His beard was softer than she expected, and his lips were gentle, questioning rather than demanding. Teresa responded without hesitation, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, became more certain, and she felt his other armband around her waist, lifting her slightly as he stood and pulled her fully against his body. She could feel the hard muscles of his chest and stomach, the incredible strength in his arms, and instead of feeling threatened, she felt utterly safe. This was a man who could break her in half without effort, but who held her like she was made of glass, who kissed her like she was precious and rare, When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Seth rested his forehead against hers. "I should not have done that," he said, but made no move to let her go. "Why not?" Teresa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you have had a traumatic experience. Because you might be feeling grateful and confusing that with something else. Because I am a wanted man living alone in the mountains with nothing to offer a woman like you. A woman like me?" Teresa pulled back to look at him. "What does that mean?" "Beautiful, smart, young. You could have any man in Wyoming. You should not settle for someone like me. Someone broken and half wild who does not know how to live in the world anymore." Teresa cupped his bearded face in both her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Seth Garrett, you listen to me. I am not confusing anything. Yes, you saved my life, and yes, I am grateful. But that is not why I kissed you back. I kissed you back because in 2 days you have shown me more kindness and genuine care than any man has in years. Because you are not broken, you are healing. And there is a difference. Because when I look at you, I do not see someone who is too damaged for love. I see someone who understands what really matters and is not afraid to fight for it." "Teresa." Seth breathed her name like a prayer and kissed her again, deeper this time, with less hesitation and more heat. They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, kissing and talking in equal measure, learning the shape and taste of each other. Seth told her about his childhood, about learning to hunt and trap from his father, about his mother teaching him to read by lamplight. Teresa told him about growing up in Riverton, about the dreams she had harbored of seeing the world, about the loneliness of being the only child of a man obsessed with finding silver. "I want you to stay," Seth said as the night deepened around them. "Not just the 3 days until your horse heals. I want you to stay here with me, make a life in these mountains." Teresa's heart soared and crashed in the same moment. "Seth, I cannot. My father needs me. And besides, we barely know each other. This could be just, I do not know. Proximity and adrenaline." "It is not," Seth said with absolute certainty. "I have been alive for 27 years, Teresa. I have seen enough of the world to know the difference between infatuation and something real. This is real. How can you possibly know that after 2 days?" "Because I feel it," Seth said simply, placing his hand over his heart. "Here, in the part of me that was dead and is now alive again, you did that. And I do not think I can go back to being alone now that I know what it is like to have you here." Teresa wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to throw caution to the wind and agree to stay in this mountain valley with this incredible man. But she was also her father's daughter, practical and cautious, aware that feelings could lie and hearts could lead you astray. "Give me the 3 days," she said finally. "Let me think about it, really think about it. And if at the end of those 3 days I still feel the same way, if you still feel the same way, then we can talk about what comes next." Seth nodded slowly. 3 days, he agreed. "I can do 3 days. But Teresa, I want you to know something. I have never felt this way about anyone. I have never wanted to share my life with another person. Never wanted to come home to someone and know they would be there waiting. The fact that I want that now, want it with you, that means something." "I know," Teresa said softly. "And I feel it too. That is why I need the 3 days. Because this is too important to rush, too important to get wrong." They kissed once more, long and sweet and full of promise, and then reluctantly separated for the night. Teresa went to the cabin while Seth headed to the stable, but she could still feel the warmth of his arms around her, could still taste him on her lips. She lay in his bed surrounded by his scent and thought about what it would mean to stay here. She would have to leave her father, at least partially, though the cabin was not so far from town that she could not visit regularly. She would be giving up any chance of seeing the wider world, at least for the foreseeable future. But she would have Seth, this fierce and gentle man who looked at her like she hung the moon. Was that enough? Could love be enough when it was so new, so untested? Teresa did not have the answers yet, but she had 3 days to find them. The next morning dawned clear and cool, and Teresa woke to find Seth already up and working on some project outside. She dressed and went to find him, following the sound of hammering to discover he was building an addition onto the stable. "What are you doing?" she asked, watching the play of muscles under his shirt as he worked. "Making a proper room for Rosie," Seth said, not pausing in his work. "And maybe another horse if you decide to stay. 2 horses would be better, give them company." "You are making plans," Teresa observed, a smile tugging at her lips. "Hope," Seth corrected, finally stopping to look at her. "I am making plans based on hope." They spent the day working together, Teresa helping hold boards in place while Seth hammered, fetching tools and water as needed. It was domestic and comfortable, and she found herself imagining doing this every day, building a life alongside this man in these mountains. They checked on Rosie together, and the mare was indeed healing beautifully. Seth changed the bandage, showing Teresa how to apply the poultice he had made, explaining which herbs were for infection and which were for pain. He was a patient teacher, his hands guiding hers, and she was acutely aware of his closeness, the heat of his body behind her. You would have made a good doctor, Teresa said as they finished with the horse. Thought about it once, Seth admitted. But I do not have the patience for people's stupidity. Too many folks hurt themselves doing things they know are dangerous, then expect someone else to fix them. Like getting shot because you charged 4 armed men? Seth had the grace to look slightly sheepish. That was different. That was important, because I was important. Yes, Seth said simply, and kissed her right there in the stable with horse and sunlight and the smell of hay all around them. The afternoon found them by the stream, Seth teaching Teresa to fish with his hands the way his father had taught him. She was terrible at it, making too much noise and moving too quickly, but Seth was endlessly patient, his arms around her as he guided her movements, his voice low in her ear as he explained what to look for. She did not catch a single fish, but she did not care because she was laughing more than she had laughed in years, and Seth was laughing with her, and the sound of his joy was more precious to her than all the silver in Wyoming. That night they cooked together again, working in easy synchronicity that felt like they had been doing this for years rather than days. They ate watching the sunset, and afterward, Seth took her hand and led her to a spot beyond the cabin where the view opened up to show the entire valley spread out below them, the mountains rising on all sides like guardian walls. This is my favorite place in the world, Seth said. I come here when I need to think, when the loneliness gets too heavy. I look at all this beauty and remember that there is still good in the world, still things worth protecting and cherishing. It is incredible, Teresa breathed, taking in the vast wilderness spread before them. I want to share it with you, Seth said, turning to face her. Not just for 3 days, but for all the days I have left. I know it is fast, I know I am asking a lot, but Teresa, I have wasted 5 years hiding from life. I do not want to waste any more time. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to teach you everything I know about these mountains. I want to grow old watching sunsets from this spot with you by my side. Teresa felt tears prickling her eyes. Seth, I want that too. But my father, your father wants you to be happy, Seth interrupted gently. I saw it in his eyes when he looked at you. He wants to know you are safe and loved. I can give you both those things. And you would only be 2 hours from town. You could visit as often as you wanted. He could visit here. We could make it work, Teresa. If you want to. I do want to, Teresa admitted, the tears spilling over now. That is what scares me. I want it so much. And we have only known each other 3 days. What if we are wrong? What if this is just some kind of temporary madness brought on by danger and proximity? Seth wiped her tears away with his thumbs, his touch achingly gentle. Then we will figure it out together. But Teresa, I do not think we are wrong. I think we are right in a way that nothing else in my life has ever been right. And I am willing to bet my heart on that. The question is, are you? Teresa looked up at this man who had appeared in her life like a miracle, who had saved her and sheltered her and shown her what it felt like to be truly seen. She thought about going back to Riverton, to her small room behind the mining office, to the endless parade of men who saw her as either a prize to be won or an obstacle to be overcome. She thought about years stretching ahead, empty and lonely, always wondering what might have been if she had been brave enough to take a chance. And then she thought about waking up in this cabin, to the smell of coffee and the sound of Seth moving around, about learning to truly live in these mountains, about building something real and lasting with a man who understood both strength and gentleness. Yes, she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. Yes, I am willing to bet my heart on this, on us. Seth's face transformed, the hardness melting away to reveal pure joy. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around as he kissed her, and Teresa laughed against his mouth, dizzy with happiness and relief and the heady feeling of having taken a leap and knowing someone would catch her. They stayed on the mountain until full dark, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans and promises. Seth would come to town with her when her father arrived, would formally ask Samuel for permission to court her. They would take things slowly, give everyone time to adjust, but the end goal was clear. Teresa would move to the mountain and they would make a life together. I will build us a bigger cabin, Seth said, already planning. One with a proper bedroom and maybe a room for guests for when your father visits. And we will need a better stove, and shelves for your things. And Seth, Teresa interrupted with a laugh, we do not need to do everything at once. The cabin is fine as it is. We can add on as we need to. I just want everything to be perfect for you, Seth said seriously. You are giving up a lot to be here. I want to make sure you never regret it. I could never regret this, Teresa said with absolute certainty. Not as long as I have you. That night they stayed up late, talking by the fire, planning their future in detail. Seth wanted to expand his trapping and hunting operation, maybe sell more furs and meat in town to bring in steady income. Teresa suggested he could also sell some of his medicinal herbs and poultices to the town doctor, who was always complaining about shortages of effective medicines. They talked about maybe getting some chickens, possibly a milk cow, small steps toward making the homestead more self-sufficient. What about children? Seth asked softly. Do you want them? Teresa felt her cheeks heat, but met his eyes steadily. Someday, yes, not right away, but someday. What about you? I never thought I did, Seth admitted, but now with you I can imagine it. A daughter with your dark eyes and stubborn streak, a son to teach hunting and fishing to, a family. He said the last word with wonder, like it was a concept he had never truly considered before. Then we will have that, Teresa promised. Someday, when we are ready. The third day passed in a blur of happiness and preparation. Rosie was well enough to walk without limping, and Seth pronounced her ready to travel. Teresa packed the few things she had brought with her, but found herself reluctant to leave, already thinking of this cabin as home in a way her room in town had never been. You will be back soon, Seth reminded her, reading her expression. A week at most, just long enough to get your father's blessing and pack your things properly. What if he says no? Teresa asked, voicing her secret fear. What if he forbids it? Then we will work to change his mind, Seth said calmly. But Teresa, your father saw how I looked at you. He saw how you looked at me. He is not a stupid man. He knows what is happening here, and I think he approves. Why else would he leave you here for 3 days? That evening, Samuel Sullivan arrived as promised, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. He took one look at Teresa and Seth, standing close together on the porch, their hands intertwined, and his weathered face broke into a knowing smile. Well, he said, dismounting with a grunt. I suppose I should have seen this coming, Papa. Teresa started, but Samuel held up a hand. Before you start explaining, let me say something. Teresa, I have known you for 22 years. I know what you look like when you are happy, and I have not seen that look on your face since before your mother died. And Seth, you saved my daughter's life and asked for nothing in return. You have given her shelter and treated her with respect. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Sir, Seth said formally, stepping forward. I would like your permission to court your daughter. My intentions are honorable. I want to marry her if she will have me and build a life together here in these mountains. Samuel looked at Seth for a long moment, weighing and judging. Then he looked at Teresa, and whatever he saw in her face seemed to satisfy him. You have my blessing, he said finally. But I want to be clear about something. If you hurt her, if you ever give me reason to regret this decision, there is not a mountain high enough or hole deep enough for you to hide from me. Understood, understood, Seth said without hesitation. And I promise you, sir, I would rather die than cause her pain. Good, Samuel said and stuck out his hand. Seth shook it firmly, and Teresa felt something settle in her chest, a rightness that had been missing her whole life. They had dinner together, the three of them, and made plans. Teresa would return to town with her father tonight, spend a week settling her affairs and packing her things. Seth would come down at the end of the week, and they would have a small ceremony in the church, nothing fancy, just the official recognition of what they both already knew to be true. You are not going to live together before you are married, Samuel said firmly. I may approve of this courtship, but I still have standards. Teresa can stay in town until the wedding. Of course, Seth agreed immediately. Whatever you think is proper. As the sun began to set, Teresa reluctantly prepared to leave. She said goodbye to Rosie, who was staying another few days with Seth to complete her recovery, and then turned to face the man who had changed her life in less than a week. 1 week, she said, reaching up to cup his bearded face. That is all. I can survive 1 week, so can I, Seth said, though his arms tightened around her waist like he never wanted to let go. And then you come back to me and we start our life together. I promise, Teresa whispered, and kissed him one last time, pouring everything she felt into it, all her hope and love and certainty. The ride back to town felt endless, and Teresa spent the entire journey looking back over her shoulder at the mountains, knowing Seth was up there somewhere, already counting the days until she returned. Her father noticed but said nothing, just smiled that knowing smile and let her have her thoughts. The week in Riverton passed slowly, each day feeling like an eternity. Teresa packed her meager belongings, said goodbye to the few friends she had made, and tried to ignore the gossip that swirled through town about Samuel Sullivan's daughter running off to marry some wild mountain man. Let them talk, Teresa thought. They did not understand, could not understand what she and Seth had found in each other. She visited the general store and bought supplies for the cabin, fabric to make curtains, seeds for the garden, small luxuries that would make the mountain homestead more comfortable. She spent an afternoon with the town's seamstress, getting fitted for a simple but pretty wedding dress. Nothing elaborate, just clean lines and good fabric that would wear well. Her father watched all these preparations with a mixture of pride and sadness. I am going to miss you, he admitted one evening over dinner. This house is going to feel very empty without you in it. I am only 2 hours away, Papa, Teresa reminded him, and you are welcome to visit any time. Seth meant it when he said we could build a guest room. I know, Samuel said, and I will visit often. But it is still the end of something, is not it? You have been my little girl for 22 years and now you are going to be someone's wife. It makes a man feel old." "You are not old," Teresa said, squeezing his hand. "And I will always be your daughter, Papa. Marriage does not change that." "I know," Samuel said again. "And I am happy for you, Teresa. Truly. Seth is a good man, better than most. He will take care of you. And I will take care of him," Teresa said. "That is how it works, right? Two people taking care of each other?" Samuel smiled. "That is exactly how it works. Your mother and I, we took care of each other for 20 years. It was not always easy and we had our disagreements, but at the end of every day we knew we were on the same team. That is what made it work. As long as you and Seth remember that, you will be fine." On the 7th day, Seth came down from the mountain. Teresa saw him riding into town from her window and immediately rushed outside, decorum be damned. He saw her coming and dismounted just in time to catch her as she launched herself at him, wrapping her legs around his waist and kissing him in front of half the town. There were scandalized gasps and disapproving whispers, but Teresa did not care. Seth was here, solid and real in her arms, and tonight they would be married, and tomorrow they would start their new life together. The ceremony was simple, held in the small wooden church on the edge of town. The preacher was a kind-faced man who had known Teresa since she was a child, and he performed the service with genuine warmth, talking about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of commitment and love. Teresa barely heard the words, too focused on Seth standing beside her, his hand warm and strong in hers, his eyes never leaving her face. When the preacher finally pronounced them man and wife, Seth kissed her with gentle reverence, and Teresa felt something fundamental shift in her chest. This was real. This was forever. She was Seth's wife, and he was her husband, and they belonged to each other now in the most fundamental way possible. The small gathering of guests, mostly her father's friends from the mining community, congratulated them with hearty handshakes and knowing smiles. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was a brief celebration with dancing and laughter, but Teresa was impatient to leave, eager to start her new life. As the sun began to set, she and Seth said their goodbyes. Her father hugged her tightly, whispering, "Be happy, little bird. That is all I have ever wanted for you." Then he shook Seth's hand one more time, the gesture carrying weight and warning and acceptance all at once. They rode out of town together, Teresa on Rosie and Seth on his big bay, leading the pack horse loaded with all her belongings. The trail up to the cabin was familiar now, and as they climbed higher into the mountains, Teresa felt the tension of the last week draining away. This was right. This was where she belonged. The cabin came into view just as the last light was fading from the sky, and Teresa felt a surge of pure joy. Home, this was home now, not just a place to visit but her actual home, the place where she would spend the rest of her life. Seth helped her down from Rosie, but instead of leading her to the cabin, he swept her up in his arms, carrying her across the threshold like she weighed nothing. Inside, Teresa saw that he had been busy during the week of their separation. There were wildflowers in a jar on the table, fresh curtains on the windows, and the bed had been made up with new quilts that looked hand-stitched. "You made those?" Teresa asked in wonder, touching the intricate patterns. "My mother taught me," Seth said, setting her gently on her feet. "Figured a man who lives alone needs to know how to keep himself warm. But I always thought they were too pretty for just me. I am glad I finally have someone to share them with." Teresa turned to face him, this man who was now her husband, and felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what they had done. They had known each other for barely more than a week, and yet here they were, married and committed to spending their lives together. It should have felt terrifying, but instead it felt perfect. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily because they were simply the truth. "I know it is fast, I know some people would say it is crazy, but I love you, Seth Garrett. I think I have loved you since the moment you came out of those trees like some kind of avenging angel." Seth's face softened, all the hard edges melting away. "I love you too, Teresa. I loved you when you stood in that canyon with your little derringer, ready to fight even though you were outmatched. I loved you when you laughed as I tried to teach you to fish. I loved you every moment of this week when I was alone up here and all I could think about was getting you back. I will love you every day for the rest of my life." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Teresa's responded with all the passion and certainty in her heart. This was her husband, her partner, her love, and this was their beginning. The months that followed were the happiest of Teresa's life. She learned the rhythms of mountain living, the constant hard work balanced by moments of stunning beauty and peace. Seth taught her to shoot properly, to track game through the forest, to identify useful plants and avoid poisonous ones. She taught him to appreciate small comforts, to take time for beauty instead of just survival, to laugh more and brood less. They worked together to improve the homestead, building the addition to the cabin that included a proper bedroom and a guest room for her father's visits. They planted a larger garden and bought chickens from town, the silly birds clucking around the yard and providing fresh eggs. Seth brought home a young cow, and Teresa learned to milk her, even though she complained about how early she had to wake up to do it. Her father visited often, always staying a few days, and Teresa could see him relaxing more each time, reassured that she was truly happy and well cared for. He and Seth developed a strong friendship, spending hours talking about mining techniques and mountain lore, and Teresa would watch them with satisfaction, glad that the two most important men in her life got along so well. Winter came early that year, and Teresa experienced her first true mountain winter, the snow piling up until it was over her head, the world narrowing to just the cabin and the surrounding clearing. She learned why Seth had been so insistent on stocking plenty of supplies, as there were weeks when leaving the cabin was nearly impossible, but even trapped by snow, she was not bored. They read together by the fireplace, Seth's deep voice bringing Shakespeare to life in a way no theater performance ever could. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and dreams and fears. They made love with increasing confidence and passion, learning what brought each other pleasure, their initial shyness giving way to genuine intimacy.
"Are you happy?"
Seth asked one night as they lay tangled together under the quilts, a blizzard howling outside. "Happier than I knew was possible," Teresa answered honestly, tracing the scars on his chest. "Are you?" "Yes," Seth said simply. "I thought I would never feel this way again, never want to share my life with someone. But you changed everything, Teresa. You made me remember what it is like to live instead of just survive." Spring came eventually, the snow melting to reveal a world reborn in green and gold. Teresa's father brought news that he had sold his claim, getting a fair price from a consortium of independent miners who promised to develop it responsibly. With the money, he bought a small house in town and retired from active mining, content to spend his remaining years in comfort. "I am proud of you," he told Teresa during one of his visits. "You took a chance on something people said was crazy and you made it work. That takes courage." "I learned from the best," Teresa said, hugging him. "You and Mama taught me that some things are worth fighting for, worth taking risks for. Seth is my silver vein, Papa. He is what makes everything else worthwhile." That summer, Teresa discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, her body changing in subtle ways that she initially dismissed. But when she finally admitted the possibility to herself, joy flooded through her so intensely she had to sit down. She told Seth that evening as they sat on their favorite spot overlooking the valley. "I am pregnant," she said simply, watching his face carefully. Seth went very still, his eyes widening. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I am sure. We are going to have a baby, Seth." For a moment he did not react, and Teresa felt a flicker of worry. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, pure unfiltered joy, and he whooped with happiness, picking her up and spinning her around before remembering her condition and setting her down gently. "We are having a baby," he said in wonder. "Teresa, we are going to be parents. Are you happy about it?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy?" Seth cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright with emotion. "I am terrified and thrilled and amazed all at once. A year ago I was alone on this mountain thinking I would die alone. Now I have a wife I love more than breathing, and soon I will have a child. How could I be anything but happy?" They spent the summer preparing for the baby's arrival. Seth built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, carving small animals into the headboard. Teresa sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling every time she thought about the small life growing inside her. Her father visited more frequently now, excited about becoming a grandfather, bringing gifts and advice and stories about when Teresa was a baby. The birth came in late autumn, a difficult labor that lasted through an entire day and night. The town's midwife had come up to stay with them as Teresa's time approached, and she proved her worth as she coached Teresa through the pain and exhaustion. Seth stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when Teresa cursed him for getting her into this condition. Finally, as the sun rose on the second day, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced and screaming, with a shock of dark hair in her father's blue eyes. "Catherine," Teresa said immediately, looking at her father who had ridden up as soon as the midwife sent word that labor had started. "We are naming her Catherine after my mother." Samuel's eyes filled with tears and he nodded, too overcome to speak. Seth held his daughter with trembling hands, this tiny miracle that he and Teresa had created together, and Teresa saw tears streaming down his bearded face. "She is beautiful," he whispered in awe. "She is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "Second most beautiful," Teresa corrected with a tired smile. "I am still the first." Seth laughed through his tears and leaned down to kiss her gently. "You are right. You are the most beautiful, and she is the second most beautiful. And I am the luckiest man who has ever lived." Little Catherine proved to be a strong, healthy baby with a set of lungs that could wake the dead. She kept them up many nights those first few months, but neither Teresa nor Seth minded. They would take turns walking her around the cabin singing soft lullabies, marveling at her tiny fingers and toes. As the years passed, their family grew. 2 years after Catherine came a son they named Samuel after Teresa's father. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's tendency toward thoughtful silence. Then another daughter, Rebecca, who was wild and fearless from the moment she could walk. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, new rooms added as needed. Seth proved to be an excellent father, patient and loving but firm when necessary. He taught the children everything he knew about the mountains, about respecting nature and understanding their place in it. Teresa taught them to read and write, using her mother's old primers, and was pleased to discover they all inherited the love of learning. Samuel Sullivan lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren, spending his final years in contentment, splitting his time between his house in town and the mountain cabin. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, and they buried him in the small cemetery in Riverton next to Teresa's mother. He was happy at the end, Seth told Teresa as they stood at the grave. He told me once that saving you from those outlaws was the best thing I ever did, not because of what could have happened, but because it led us to each other. He said he could die happy knowing you were loved and cared for. Teresa leaned into her husband's strength, grateful for his steady presence even in grief. He was right, she said. About everything I am loved and cared for, and it is all because you came out of those trees that day like God's own fury. No, Seth corrected gently. I came out like a man who could not stand by and let evil happen. The rest, everything good that came after, that is because you took a chance on a half-wild mountain man who did not know what he was missing until he found you. They stood together in silence for a moment, remembering and honoring, then turned and walked back to where their children waited with the horses. Life went on as it always did, marked by small moments of joy and sorrow, by seasons changing and children growing, by the steady accumulation of years lived well and fully. On their 10th anniversary, Seth took Teresa back to that overlook where he had first told her he loved her. The children were staying with friends in town, giving them a rare night alone together. They sat watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. Do you ever regret it? Seth asked quietly. Giving up town life, the chance to see the world, all the things you could have done? Teresa thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. Then she looked up at this man who had been her husband, her partner, her love for 10 years. She thought about their children sleeping safely in their beds, about the life they had built together on this mountain, about the peace and contentment she felt every time she came home to their cabin. No, she said with absolute certainty. I have everything I ever wanted right here. You are my adventure, Seth. You and our children and this life we have made. I would not trade it for all the world. Seth pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I love you, Teresa Garrett. I loved you that first day in the canyon. I love you now. And I will love you on the last day of my life. And I love you, Teresa said, turning to kiss him properly. My mountain man, my protector, my home. They stayed on the overlook until the stars came out, talking and remembering, planning and dreaming. Below them the valley spread out in darkness, lights twinkling from distant homesteads. Behind them their cabin waited, warm and welcoming, and around them the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to a love story that had started with violence and fear but had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. Years continued to pass in the comfortable rhythm of mountain life. Catherine grew into a lovely young woman, serious and studious like her mother, with her father's steady strength. She eventually married a young rancher from the valley below, a good man who Seth approved of after careful scrutiny. Samuel became a skilled hunter and tracker, though he surprised everyone by deciding to study medicine, riding down to Cheyenne to apprentice with a doctor there. Rebecca remained wild and free-spirited, declaring she would never marry, and instead wanted to explore the far reaches of the mountains. Documenting the plants and animals she found, Seth and Teresa watched their children grow and leave, the cabin gradually emptying until it was just the 2 of them again the way it had started. But this time, the solitude was not born of loneliness but of completion, the natural progression of a life well lived. We did good, Seth said one evening as they sat on the porch, both of them gray-haired and weathered now but still strong. Our children are happy and healthy and good people. We made something that matters. We did, Teresa agreed, lacing her fingers through his, and we're not done yet. I plan on at least another 20 years with you. Seth Garrett, only 20? Seth teased. I was hoping for 30 at least. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the valley, and Teresa thought about that terrified young woman in the canyon, certain she was about to die. If she could go back and tell that younger self what was waiting for her, would she believe it? Would she believe that the terrifying mountain man who appeared like an avenging angel would become the love of her life, her partner in every sense of the word, the father of her children and the keeper of her heart? Probably not, Teresa thought with a smile. But it had all happened anyway, and she was grateful for every moment, every trial and triumph, every ordinary day and extraordinary night. Seth and Teresa Garrett lived on their mountain for another 15 years, surrounded by visiting children and grandchildren, by the changing seasons and the eternal beauty of the wilderness they called home. They died within 6 months of each other, Seth first from a stroke that took him quickly and mercifully, Teresa following from what the doctor called a broken heart, but what their children knew was simply her refusal to live in a world without her beloved husband. They were buried on the mountain they had loved, in a small clearing where wildflowers grew thick in summer and the view stretched for miles. Their children carved simple headstones that read, Seth Garrett, beloved husband and father, he lived with honor. Teresa Sullivan, Garrett, beloved wife and mother, she loved with courage. And on the bottom of both stones, added by their children who understood what their parents had built together. Together from canyon to eternity, the cabin still stands, maintained now by the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who visit each summer to remember and honor the love story that started it all. Sometimes, when the light is just right, locals swear they can see 2 figures sitting on the overlook, watching the sunset together the way they did for so many years. It is probably just a trick of the light, shadows, and wishful thinking. But then again, maybe not. Maybe some loves are strong enough to transcend even death, to leave an imprint on the places where they flourished. Maybe that canyon where Teresa was cornered by outlaws and Seth came out of the trees like God's own fury holds a special kind of magic. The kind that only comes from 2 souls recognizing each other across all the noise and chaos of life and choosing, against all odds, to build something beautiful together. And in the end, is not that what every great love story is? 2 people finding each other when they least expect it, recognizing something precious and rare, and having the courage to hold on no matter what challenges come their way. Seth and Teresa's story was wild and unlikely, starting with violence and danger, but transforming through love and commitment into something that lasted decades and created ripples that continue on through their descendants. Their great-granddaughter, a historian named Catherine Sarah, would eventually write a book about them, based on Teresa's detailed journals and interviews with the eldest grandchildren who still remembered their stories. The book would become a modest bestseller, not because the story was so extraordinary, but because it was so fundamentally human. It was about finding love in unexpected places, about having the courage to take chances, about building a life one day at a time with the person who makes your heart feel like home. And is not that what we all want, in the end? To be seen, to be loved, to matter to someone in a fundamental way. Seth and Teresa found that in each other, and in finding it, they created something that outlasted them both. Their love became legend, whispered about in Riverton and the surrounding valleys. A story parents told their children about the importance of courage and commitment and recognizing what truly matters. The mountain still stands, eternal and unchanging. The cabin still welcomes visitors, filled with the echoes of laughter and love. And somewhere in the space between memory and myth, Seth and Teresa Garrett continue their watch over the valley they loved, their story complete, their love eternal, their legacy living on in every person who hears their tale and believes, even for a moment, that true love is real and worth fighting for. From that terrifying moment in the canyon when outlaws had her cornered and a mountain man came out of the trees like God's own fury, to a lifetime lived in love and partnership, to a peaceful end surrounded by the fruits of that love, Teresa and Seth's story was everything a romance should be. It was passionate and tender, dangerous and safe, wild and domestic, all at once. It proved that sometimes the best loves are the ones that surprise us, that come roaring into our lives when we least expect them and change everything we thought we knew about ourselves and what we needed. And perhaps that is the real magic of their story. Not that it happened, but that it could happen. That somewhere in this wide world, 2 people can find each other against all odds and build something that lasts. That love, real love, is still possible even in hard times and dangerous places. That choosing each other every single day is enough to create a life worth living and a story worth telling. Seth and Teresa Garrett proved that, and their story continues to inspire everyone who hears it. A testament to the enduring power of love to transform, to heal, to make sense of a chaotic world. They were just one man and one woman who happened to cross paths at exactly the right moment, but what they built together became something extraordinary. A love that echoed through generations and reminded everyone who heard of it that magic is real if you are brave enough to reach for it. The end of their story is just the beginning of their legend, and the mountains remember, the canyon remembers, and love, true love, never really dies. It just transforms, becoming part of the landscape, part of the collective memory, part of the hope that keeps us all believing that somewhere out there our own perfect match is waiting, ready to come out of the trees like God's own fury and change our lives forever.